Is he still working in construction? God, how awkward, drawled a former classmate at the reunion. But when my husband walked into the hall an hour later and was introduced as the owner of the city's largest construction complex, the thin white envelope was buried among advertising brochures and bills. I would have probably thrown it away unnoticed if I hadn't recognized the Westwood School logo in the corner. My fingers froze. 15 years. Had it really been 15 years? Carefully opening the envelope, I pulled out a thick card with gold embossing. Dear Emily Parker, you are invited to the 2010 Westwood High School reunion. 15 years later, a time to remember the past and share the present. Date, time, address of the exclusive Ritz Hotel downtown. Dress code, elegant evening wear. +1 welcome. I leaned against the kitchen table, waves of the past washing over me. Emily Parker, straight-A student, president of the math club, the girl who always had the right answers for teachers and never for classmates. Quiet, serious, with glasses I once hated, but that were now back in fashion. I gave a bitter smile. Something interesting? Jack's voice brought me back to the present. He walked into the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. High school reunion invite, I said, handing him the card. 15 years later. Jack read the card, his eyes lighting up. We have to go, he said with enthusiasm. Show them what an incredible woman Emily Parker became. I shook my head. Not sure I want to go, I admitted. High school wasn't my best time. You never really told me, Jack said, placing the invitation on the table and looking at me more closely. Was it that bad? I shrugged, searching for the right words. Not bad exactly, just I was invisible, and for the few who noticed me, I was a punchline, Victoria Miles and her clique. I paused, surprised at how easily the name surfaced. They made my life hell in senior year, my grades, my style, my awkwardness around boys. All of it was fuel for their jokes. Jack stepped closer, wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin settling warmly on my shoulder. All the more reason to go. Show them their opinion never defined who you are. I turned in his embrace. They'll just see I married a simple construction worker, I said, making air quotes. You know how they'll look at that? Jack pulled back slightly, a flicker of hurt in his eyes. So what? Are you ashamed? No, I said too quickly. Never. You know I'm not. It's just, they won't get it. To them, success is about status, money, social prestige. Victoria's probably married to some lawyer or surgeon. They won't understand our journey. Jack rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What if I come with you? My heart fluttered. Of course, I'd feel more confident together, but... You have that investor meeting that evening, I reminded him. Right, he snapped his fingers. But I could join you later. Say, an hour or two in, you get settled, and then I show up and rescue you if needed. I smiled at the image. My knight in a tailored suit. All right, I finally said. We'll go, but if it gets unbearable, we leave. Deal? Scout's honor. Jack raised his hand in a mock pledge, though I knew full well he was never a scout. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Thoughts of the upcoming reunion tangled with memories. How would my classmates react if they knew how Jack and I met? 10 years ago, I was a freshly minted economist with top honors, just landed a junior analyst role at a prestigious consulting firm. Rented apartment overlooking the park, a designer wardrobe I started building the moment I got my first paycheck. My parents were proud, friends envious, everything was on track. Then the plumbing in my perfect apartment broke, and the landlord sent some handyman. That handyman turned out to be Jack. I remember when he walked in, tall, tousled, dark hair, worn jeans and a work shirt with rolled-up sleeves, showing strong forearms. I noticed ink stains on his fingers, not what I expected from a simple laborer. Sounds like you've got a Niagara Falls situation here, he said instead of hello, his smile immediately easing my caution. As he worked, we talked. He asked unexpected questions, not about the weather or traffic, but about the books on my shelves, the painting I'd just bought at a flea market. When I mentioned I worked in economics, he didn't feign polite disinterest like most did. He started asking about financial models for small businesses. "Construction isn't just my job," he said. "It's a stepping stone while I save up to start my own business." At the time, I didn't quite believe him. Then he asked me out for coffee, and to my surprise, I said yes. When I introduced him to my parents 3 months later, the reaction was predictable. "A construction worker?" my mom repeated when I told her over the phone. "Emily, with your education and prospects." "He's not just a construction worker, Mom. He has a dream, a plan." "Everyone has dreams, dear, but life is lived in reality." The dinner itself was tense. My parents were polite, but I saw the condescending glances they exchanged as Jack spoke about his plans. Our first real fight happened after that dinner, driving back in his old pickup truck. "They think you're making a mistake," Jack said, eyes fixed on the road, "that you deserve better than some guy in work boots." "No, they just—" "Don't, Emily. I'm not blind or deaf." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Maybe they're right. Maybe you should find someone more appropriate, with the right degree, the right credit score." Looking at his profile in the dim car light, I realized I wasn't looking for someone more appropriate. I'd already found the person I'd follow anywhere. "I think my parents just need time," I said, squeezing his hand, "to see what I see." The next years were a roller coaster. We moved in together 6 months later, a tiny apartment on the outskirts, all we could afford. On weekends, Jack worked construction jobs. At night, he pored over his projects and business plans. I kept climbing the corporate ladder, but more and more, I felt my ambitions shifting. The first investor said no. So did the second. The third made an offer so unfair, it may as well have been a rejection. Then fate hit us with a 1-2 punch. My firm started layoffs, and my job was at risk. At the same time, Jack fell ill, a severe pneumonia he mistook for a cold and kept working through until he collapsed. 2 weeks in the hospital, bills mounting daily, my constant anxiety. When Jack finally began to recover, my bank account was nearly empty, and a layoff notice sat on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry," Jack rasped when I admitted I'd lost my job. He was still too weak to sit up. "It's all because of me. If you hadn't spent so much time helping with my projects—" "Not another word," I pressed my finger to his lips. "We'll get through this." The next months, I took any work I could find: remote consulting, writing business plans for startups, even editing gigs. And then I found out I was pregnant. The news came during the height of an economic downturn. Construction sites shut down, clients withdrew, and our savings were dwindling fast. "We'll manage," Jack said now, holding me as I cried from fear and hormones. "I promise, Emily, our baby will be okay." And somehow, we did manage. Jack finally found an investor, a small construction firm willing to back his first independent project. The terms weren't ideal, but it was a chance. Jack's first project, a small residential complex made from eco-friendly materials, was completed when Lily was 1.5 years old. Then came the second project, then the third. Jack hired his first employees, rented an office, a tiny space above a flower shop, but still. Slowly, Parker Construction began to build a reputation in the city, not as an industry giant, but as a company people trusted. The day we moved into our own home, spacious, with a garden for Lily and an office for Jack, big enough to hold all his blueprints and models, I remembered that night on the unfinished skyscraper and his words, "One day I'll build something that changes the city skyline." We weren't there yet, but we were on the way. Silver dress or black one? Classic cut or something more daring? Stilettos or something more comfortable? Questions I usually answered in 5 minutes had now turned into a strategic operation. "You look stunning in both," Jack said, peeking into the bedroom and seeing me holding up 2 dresses on hangers. "Not helping," I muttered. "The silver one is too flashy, like I'm trying too hard." but the black might seem like I'm playing it too safe. Jack walked over and hugged me from behind, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I smiled in spite of myself. Jack always knew how to make me smile, even in the most stressful moments. As I was finishing my makeup, Jack's phone rang. "Yes, Mark, I understand. Of course, that's important." When he hung up, he gave me an apologetic look. "The investor meeting's running long. They want to go over a few more things." "How late will you be?" I asked, trying to hide my disappointment. "An hour, maybe 2 tops." Jack stepped closer and took my hands in his. "I'll definitely come, I promise, just a little later." I nodded, pretending to understand. Of course, business came first, especially a project Jack had been developing for over a year, the most ambitious in the company's history. Jack gently squeezed my hands. "Are you sure you want to go? We can still skip it." Tempting. Stay home, order pizza, watch a movie with Lily before bed. But something inside wouldn't let me back out. "No, I'll go," I said firmly. 15 years is long enough to stop being afraid of a group of people I went to high school with. I was almost certain Jack didn't believe my confidence, but he just nodded. Sitting in the taxi on the way to the hotel, I couldn't shake the intrusive thoughts. "You're a successful woman," I reminded myself. "You have a beautiful family, a home, a career." The car stopped in front of the luxurious hotel. I paid, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The lobby sparkled with marble and crystal. Impeccably dressed staff welcomed guests. A sign at the banquet hall entrance read, "Westwood Class of 2010, 15 years later." The Ritz Hotel Hall dazzled with opulence. Crystal chandeliers reflected on the marble floors, creating the illusion of an infinite shimmering cosmos. Elegantly dressed guests with champagne flutes glided through the room, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. I stopped at the entrance, feeling my palms grow clammy with nerves. "Here for the reunion?" A young man in hotel staff uniform interrupted my thoughts. "Yes," I managed. "Your name for the guest list?" "Emily Parker. I used to be Emily Thompson." He checked the tablet and nodded. "Welcome, Mrs. Parker. Would you like to go straight in or leave your coat at the cloakroom first?" "Cloakroom, please." After dropping off my coat and fixing my appearance in the ladies' room mirror, I took a deep breath and headed for the banquet hall's open doors. The music grew louder, my steps slower. "Emily? Emily Thompson, is that you?" A familiar voice made me turn sharply. Megan Clark. We'd sat together in senior year, studied for exams, shared secrets we once thought were the most important things in the world. "Megan!" My voice wavered with surprise and joy. We hugged, and suddenly a piece of my anxiety melted away. I wasn't alone anymore in this hall full of ghosts from the past. "My God, you look amazing!" Megan exclaimed, pulling back to look me over. "That color suits you so well." "You look wonderful, too," I said sincerely. "I heard you became a child psychologist?" "Yeah, I opened my own practice 3 years ago. But how did you know? We haven't really kept in touch." "Facebook," I admitted with a smile. "I peeked in on your life now and then." "And I peeked at yours," Megan laughed. "I saw your family photos. Your daughter is beautiful, and your husband." She paused, probably remembering how my choice of partner used to be a topic of discussion in our year. "Jack," I prompted. "He'll be joining later. He has an important meeting." "Well then," Megan grabbed 2 champagne flutes from a passing tray and handed me one. "To the reunion." We slowly made our way through the hall. Megan, with her experience working with kids, easily struck up conversations. I stayed close, grateful for the unintentional shield she provided. Half an hour later, I felt more confident. The music no longer felt too loud, the laughter no longer intimidating, and my own presence no longer out of place. I took a sip of champagne and dared to scan the room more closely. There they were, the former kings and queens of high school. They had changed, just like all of us. That realization was oddly comforting. Time had softened the rigid social hierarchy that once felt set in stone. But the main character from my high school nightmares hadn't appeared yet. "Oh, wow, look who's here," rang out a loud melodic voice from the entrance. "Hope I'm not too late to be the life of the party?" Victoria Miles always knew how to make an entrance. Tonight was no exception. She strode into the room in a dazzling red dress, standing out among the soft pastels and darker tones worn by everyone else. Impeccable hair, flawless makeup, confident walk, as if we were back in the high school hallway and she'd just stepped out of cheer practice. Instinctively, I stepped back, trying to blend into the background, but Megan squeezed my hand. "Don't hide," she whispered. "You're not that scared girl anymore?" I nodded, grateful for the reminder. Victoria made her rounds, hugging, laughing, exchanging compliments, and she was moving steadily toward our corner. "Megan!" she exclaimed, approaching. "You look so elegant. And Emily? Emily Thompson?" "Parker," I corrected automatically. "Emily Parker now." "Of course, you got married," Victoria smiled, giving me an appraising look. "You look good, really good. These years have definitely been kind to you." There was something condescending in her tone, something of the old Victoria, but I chose to ignore it. "Thanks, you too." "Well, I try." She tossed her hair in that familiar school day gesture. "Healthy eating, yoga, travel. Oh, you must meet my husband, Richard." She waved over a tall man in a flawless suit, standing nearby with a glass of whiskey. "Sweetheart, these are my old high school girlfriends, Megan and Emily." Girlfriends. We were never girlfriends. Richard, well-groomed, strong jaw, sharp eyes, shook our hands. "Nice to meet you. Victoria's told me so much about her school days." "Richard is the CEO of First National Bank," Victoria announced proudly. "We met at a charity gala where I was presenting my foundation." "That you founded too, darling," Richard added. "Oh, just a little educational fund," Victoria made a modest gesture. "But yes, I'm proud of it." I noticed Megan subtly roll her eyes. "By the way, how did you get here?" Victoria continued. "We came in Richard's new Bentley. Just picked it up last month, didn't we, honey?" "I took a cab," I said dryly. "Jack will join me later." "Oh, your husband? What does he do?" Victoria asked with polite curiosity, and I felt my shoulders tense. "He's in construction," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "Construction?" she repeated, and there was a flicker in her eyes that made my heart sink. How fascinating. The conversation went on in the same vein. Victoria and Richard talked about their vacations in France and Italy, their membership in an exclusive country club, and their plans to buy a second home on the coast. I tried not to show how much it got to me. Not because I envied their material comfort. Jack and I were perfectly content with our life. But Victoria, just like in high school, had a way of making me feel small and insignificant. "Do you have a photo of your husband?" Victoria asked after a pause, clearly trying to be polite. "I'd love to see who our class valedictorian ended up with." I hesitated, then pulled out my phone and opened a recent photo of Jack playing with Lily in the garden. He was dressed simply, jeans, a faded t-shirt, work boots. But his smile, his eyes full of love for our daughter, the photo captured his essence perfectly. Victoria took my phone, and her perfectly sculpted eyebrows lifted slightly. "He still works on site? Oh dear, how awkward," she said softly, but loud enough for Heather and Lauren nearby to hear. Blood rushed to my cheeks. A part of me wanted to stay silent, swallow the insult like I used to in school, but another part, the one that had survived the past 10 years, demanded I defend not just Jack, but our life, our choices. "Well, actually," I began, surprised at the calm in my voice. "Attention, everyone!" a voice blared through the microphone, interrupting me. "Let's gather for the class photo. Everyone to the central platform." The moment was lost. Victoria handed my phone back with a light smile, not a trace of apology, and hurried off to join Richard for the photo. Megan squeezed my hand discreetly. "Don't mind her," she whispered. "Some people never change." I nodded, but inside I was burning with unspoken words. After the group photo, the crowd began to disperse again. I made my way to the bar, Switching my champagne for something non-alcoholic, my head was beginning to spin. "Sparkling water, please," I said to the bartender. "And I'll have the same," said a deep male voice to my right. I turned and met the eyes of a tall man in a navy blazer. It took a second to recognize Daniel Reed, once a skinny kid with braces and glasses, now a confident man with an insightful gaze. "Daniel?" I said uncertainly. "The one and only," he smiled. "Hi, Emily. It's great to see you." We had been friends in school, both quiet, focused on academics, bonded by a shared love of science discussions. "I heard you became a doctor," I said as the bartender placed our drinks on the bar. "A neurosurgeon, to be exact," he smiled slightly. "And you, from the looks of it, just survived a run-in with our former high school queen." So he had noticed the scene with Victoria. "I saw it," he confirmed, as if reading my mind. "Some things never change, huh?" "Apparently not," I said, taking a sip of water. "How's life, Daniel?" His face clouded for a moment. "Professionally, great. Personally, complicated. 2 divorces in 5 years. Not exactly a stellar track record for someone who can reconnect severed nerves." There was a bitterness in his voice I'd never heard before. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "No need," he waved it off. "I made my choices, but sometimes, I look at people like Victoria with their perfect social lives, parties, trips, and I wonder if I had my priorities right." I thought about that for a moment. "Maybe everyone has their own path to happiness," I said finally. "What looks perfect from the outside isn't always perfect inside." "Wise words," Daniel smiled. "What about you, Emily? Judging by Victoria's reaction, your life doesn't quite match her definition of a successful career." I laughed involuntarily. "That's putting it mildly. My husband, Jack, he started out as a construction worker. Now he owns his own construction company. But to someone like Victoria, it's still just manual labor." "So what? Is he happy?" That simple question caught me off guard. Not, how big is his company? Or how much does he make? But is he happy? "Yes," I said, feeling warmth rise in my chest. "Very." "Then screw Victoria's opinion," Daniel said with unexpected sharpness, and I couldn't help but let out a surprised laugh. "We've spent so many years trying to meet expectations, parents, teachers, classmates. And then you meet a patient who lost everything overnight because of an aneurysm, and you realize none of it really matters. The only thing that does is whether you were truly happy." His words hit like a revelation. I felt an invisible weight lift from my shoulders, not just the stress of the evening, but years of worrying what others thought of the life Jack and I built. "Thank you, Daniel," I said softly. "I needed to hear that." "Anytime," he raised his glass, "to true happiness, in whatever form it comes." We clinked our glasses of water, and for the first time that evening, I felt genuinely at peace. "And now," the event host announced, stepping onto the small stage, "the most interesting part of our reunion. Let's hear what life has brought each of us in the last 15 years. The idea was simple. Each graduate would have a minute or two to share the highlights of their life after school. A public celebration of achievements. Classic American tradition. I grew nervous, mentally rehearsing a brief speech. When Victoria's turn came, she glided onto the stage with the grace of a runway model and took the microphone like she'd been born to hold it. "Well, what have I been up to these 15 years?" she began with a charming smile. "After college, I worked in a PR agency representing several celebrities. No names, but you definitely know them. 6 years ago, I married Richard." She blew him a kiss. "And since then, I've focused on developing my foundation and social projects. We've traveled to Paris, Milan, Tokyo. Recently, we hosted a charity gala with 3 Nobel laureates. We tried to use our connections and resources to make the world a better place." Her speech ended with applause. Victoria stepped down gracefully, accepting compliments. With a dry throat, I made my way up to the stage. The spotlight temporarily blinded me, and I saw only blurred faces of former classmates. After high school, I studied economics at university, I began. I worked for a consulting firm specializing in financial strategies for small businesses. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. 10 years ago, I met my husband, Jack. We have a daughter, Lily. She's 6. She inherited my love of math and her father's creativity. I'm happy, I finished simply. We've built the life we dreamed of, even if the road wasn't always straight. As I stepped down to polite applause, I noticed Victoria leaning in to whisper something to Heather. When she saw me looking, she gave a sweet smile and approached as I returned to my seat. "How sweet, Emily," she said, just a bit louder than necessary. "It's so lovely to see someone who truly values family." She paused meaningfully before adding, "In times like these, when so many women are obsessed with career success and forget what really matters." Her words hung in the air. I stood there, stunned by the hypocrisy, unable to think of a worthy response. That's when my phone buzzed in my purse. I excused myself and stepped toward a quieter corner of the hall. "Hey," Jack's voice was cheerful. "Guess who's pulling up to the hotel?" My heart skipped a beat. "Seriously? I thought that meeting would take hours." "We reached an agreement faster than expected." Jack's voice carried barely contained pride. "The investors fully approved the Project M, completely, not a single revision." "Jack, that's amazing." I lowered my voice but couldn't hide the excitement. "So, the Horizon Tower is going to be built exactly to my design, with all the eco-friendly technologies I've been dreaming of." Horizon, Jack's project of the past 3 years. A 40-story building meant to be more than just another office complex. It was an architectural leap, with green terraces every 10 floors, solar panels, rainwater recycling systems, a project that could elevate Parker Construction to an entirely new level. "I'm so proud of you," I breathed. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Jack said. 5 minutes later, I turned around and saw Jack entering the room. My husband had always known how to make an impression, even without trying. Tonight, he wore a flawlessly tailored navy suit, custom-made for key investor meetings. But what struck me most was how the hotel staff reacted to his arrival. The front desk manager came over personally to greet him with a handshake. The maitre d' gave a respectful nod. As Jack passed the bar, the bartender smiled at him like an old friend. None of this escaped Victoria's sharp eye. "Your husband seems to be quite well known here," she remarked with mild surprise. I didn't have time to reply. Jack spotted me and made his way over, weaving through the guests. I could see Victoria struggling to make sense of what was happening. This didn't fit her image of a construction worker husband. Jack finally reached us and, without even glancing at Victoria, swept me into a hug, lifting me a few inches off the floor. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting me down. "But I think it was worth it." "Definitely," I said, unable to suppress a smile. Finally, Jack turned to Victoria, who watched us with an unreadable expression. "You must be Victoria," he said with a polite smile. "Nice to finally meet you. Emily's told me about you." There was no trace of sarcasm or bitterness in his voice, even though he knew very well the history I had with the high school queen. "And you're Jack," Victoria offered her hand, turning on all her charm. "At last, we meet." Before the conversation could continue, the reunion organizer approached, a man in his 40s I barely recognized. I think he used to be the president of the science club back in school. "Jack Parker," he exclaimed with genuine delight. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Paul." Jack shook his hand. "How's the renovation going on your wing?" "Wonderfully. Thank you for the personal attention to the project." Paul turned to the puzzled Victoria. "Mr. Parker designed the new wing of the children's hospital where I work. Brilliant work, all up to the latest standards." Paul glanced between Victoria and us, clearly sensing the awkwardness. "You all went to school together?" he asked, trying to break the tension. "Victoria and I did," I answered. "Jack went to a different school." "Got it," Paul beamed. "Then let me introduce everyone to Jack Parker, who generously agreed to sponsor our little celebration tonight." A few heads turned our way. Jack is the founder and CEO of Parker Construction Group, Paul continued, addressing the room. A company that, if you haven't heard, is currently the largest construction enterprise in our city. And by the way, his company handled the renovation of this very hotel last year. That explained the warm greetings from the hotel staff, something I hadn't even noticed. A murmur spread through the room. I felt the stares of former classmates, curious, assessing, surprised. But all I cared about was Victoria's reaction. She stood frozen, her smile flawless, but something in her eyes flashed, something close to panic. Richard, her husband, appeared beside her, drawn by the sudden attention to our group. "Jack Parker?" He extended his hand. "Richard Hughes, First National. I've heard about your latest project. Impressive concept." "Thank you," Jack replied with the sincere modesty that had always been part of him, no matter the scale of his success. "We just got final approval from the investors today." "Excellent." Richard shifted into business mode instantly. "We should talk about potential collaboration. The bank has some interesting offers for innovative developments." As the men exchanged professional courtesies, Victoria leaned toward me. "Emily, I think there's been a slight misunderstanding," she whispered. "When you said your husband was in construction, I assumed that he worked on a site?" I finished for her with a small smile. "He did. Back then. He started as a laborer." Victoria pressed her lips together, clearly trying to recover. "I never meant anything derogatory," she said. "Manual work deserves respect. My grandfather was a carpenter." I resisted the urge to laugh at the absurdity of the moment. "Of course," I replied in a neutral tone. "Just a misunderstanding." Jack, finishing his conversation with Richard, turned to us. "Paul offered to give us a quick tour of the renovated parts of the hotel," he said. "Want to join, Emily?" "Gladly," I said, taking his arm, feeling the tension of the evening begin to lift. After a short tour, during which Jack enthusiastically pointed out the restored historical details of the building, we returned to the ballroom. The music had slowed, the lights dimmed, creating a more intimate atmosphere. Several couples were already dancing. As we stepped onto the dance floor, the DJ announced the next song. I smiled involuntarily. It was our song, the one we danced to at our wedding. "What a coincidence," I said as Jack wrapped his arms around my waist. "Not quite," he winked. "I asked the DJ to play it while we were talking with Paul." "You're impossible," I laughed, wrapping my arms around his neck. We began to sway to the rhythm, and for a few moments, the world faded away. There was no Victoria with her complicated life, no curious stares, no echoes of past humiliations, only Jack, me, and the music. "You know," Jack said suddenly, "I was a little nervous about meeting your classmates tonight." That admission surprised me. "You?" I asked. "Nervous? Why?" He shrugged slightly, still holding me close as we danced. "I know how much their teasing hurt you in school, and I remember how your parents and friends reacted when you brought me home that first time. Just a builder, remember?" "Jack, that was so long ago." "I know." He nodded. "But part of me is still that guy in work boots who thought he wasn't good enough for a brilliant economics graduate." I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Horizon will change everything," he said. "It'll be our company's biggest project." "It's incredible, Jack." "Yeah," he nodded. "But you know when I really felt successful? The day Lily got the flu and we were working on that big proposal. Remember, you canceled your meetings, I postponed mine, and we just stayed with her, taking turns with the cold compresses, reading stories." I remembered. Lily was 4. Her fever had spiked. Without hesitation, we both dropped everything, even though important deals were at stake. In that moment, I thought, this is it. This is what matters, Jack continued. Not what people think, not contracts or awards, just that we'll always show up for each other, no matter what. His words struck something deep within me. I had spent my life measuring success by external standards, grades, degrees, career milestones, and later the validation of others. But real success was right here in our arms. We didn't need to prove anything to Victoria or anyone else. We had already won simply by staying true to ourselves and to each other. The week after the reunion passed in a comforting routine. Jack's success with the Horizon project filled us with confidence about the future. We were planning a short vacation as soon as the paperwork was finalized. Lily had been drawing pictures of beaches and palm trees and taping them to the fridge. Our life felt cloudless. The call came Thursday morning while I was getting Lily ready for school. "Mrs. Parker, this is Mark Levinsky from the legal department. I urgently need to speak with your husband." The lawyer's tense voice immediately put me on edge. "He's in the shower. Is something wrong?" A pause on the other end. "I'm afraid so. Please ask him to call me back as soon as possible. It's regarding the Horizon project." When Jack came out of the bathroom, I silently handed him the phone with a note. "Call Mark. Urgent. About Horizon." The color drained from his face. "Lily, sweetheart." Jack turned to our daughter, keeping his tone calm. "Go grab your school books, okay?" Once Lily left the room, he dialed. I watched as his shoulders tensed with every passing second, his expression darkening. "Repeat that. On what grounds are they—" He stopped abruptly, listening. "That's absurd. Our paperwork is airtight. Every blueprint, every spec—" A pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and stood still for a moment, staring into space. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart tightening with anxiety. "Innovabuild," he said the name of the rival firm with barely concealed disgust. "They filed a claim that Horizon violates their patent on an eco-water system." "But that's not true, is it?" "Of course not." His voice rose, hurt. "We've been developing this system for 3 years. Every component was cleared by legal." "So they're bluffing, trying to delay the project?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I rarely saw. "Maybe, but Mark says they submitted some convincing evidence. The investors have put things on hold." I felt the ground drop beneath me. Horizon was meant to be Jack's breakthrough. All our resources, all our hopes, everything was tied to that project. "I'll take Lily," I said, pulling myself together. "You go to the office. It'll be all right." He nodded, but in his eyes, I saw what he was trying to hide. Fear. After dropping Lily at school, I didn't go home. I drove straight to Jack's office. Something in my gut told me I needed to be there. The Parker construction office, usually buzzing with energy, felt like a hospital ward that day. Hushed voices, wary glances. The staff already sensed something was wrong, even if they hadn't been told the details. I walked to Jack's office and paused outside the closed door. I could hear voices inside, Jack, Mark, and a few members of leadership. I wasn't planning to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, I froze. "Don't tell Emily the whole truth," said Paul, the CFO and Jack's longtime friend. "She'll just worry." "I agree," added Mark. "It's worse than it looks. The materials they submitted, they look like internal documents, versions that never left your office." I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from gasping. "That's impossible," Jack said, his voice hollow. "That would mean—" "A leak," Mark finished for him. "Someone in your inner circle is working with Innovabuild." A heavy silence followed. "The investors gave us 2 weeks," Paul finally said. "If we don't prove ownership by then, they'll pull the contract and demand compensation." "That'll ruin us," Jack whispered. 10 years of work, gone. I backed away from the door, reeling. The situation was far worse than Jack had let on, and something shifted in me. I couldn't stand by and watch. For the first time in a long time, I realized my economics degree, my old consulting contacts, these weren't just parts of my past. They were tools, and I needed to use them. The following days became a marathon. Jack worked almost nonstop, coming home well past midnight and leaving before dawn. I saw him slowly sinking into despair. I decided to act. Without telling Jack, I began my own investigation. First, I called Carol, my former colleague from the consulting firm, now working at a major law firm. "Emily, I haven't heard from you in forever." Her cheerful voice brought back memories of late nights spent untangling complex cases. "How's your family?" "Carol, I need your help." I cut straight to the point, explaining the situation in as much detail as I could. "This is serious," she agreed after a pause. "Honestly, InnovaBuild has a reputation for pulling stunts like this. What can you advise?" "First, launch an internal investigation. Who had access to the files? Any unusual contact or activity? Can you recommend a good IP attorney?" "I know the best," Carol said confidently. "Give me a couple of days. I'll set up a meeting." After our call, I began digging. In Jack's office, using the password he never changed, I reviewed file access logs for the Horizon project, and I found something odd. Some documents had been copied to an external drive late at night, when the office was usually empty. The user? Alex Gordon, one of Jack's closest assistants. I met Alex at a cafe across from the office. "You copied Horizon files to a flash drive 2 weeks ago," I said without preamble as soon as he sat down. "Why?" Alex turned pale. It was a backup." "Just in case." He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Jack said all project files should be backed up." "Jack told IT to handle that. Not you, personally," I said, locking eyes with him. "And why at 10 p.m., when no one else was here?" Alex squirmed in his seat. "Emily, I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm loyal to Jack, to this company." "I want to believe you, Alex," my voice hardened, "but someone betrayed Jack, and all signs point to you." "That's ridiculous," he nearly shouted, drawing looks from other customers, then lowered his voice. "Who even gave you access to the logs? You don't work here." "I'm the wife of the man whose dream is being torn apart," I said calmly, "and I'm trying to find out who's behind it. If you're innocent, you've got nothing to hide." Alex stood up abruptly, knocking over his cup. "I don't have to listen to this. If you have a problem, take it to Jack." He stormed out, leaving me with the feeling that I was on the right track. 3 days later, after meeting with the lawyer Carol recommended, I had a strategy. But I still hadn't told Jack about what I'd been doing. He was slipping further into depression, often retreating to the garage where he'd set up a home office. And that's when fate threw me face to face with Victoria. It happened at the mall, where I'd gone to buy Lily's birthday present. We literally bumped into each other at the entrance of a children's store. "Emily!" Victoria looked genuinely surprised. "What a coincidence." Any other day, I'd have kept the interaction polite and brief. But after everything that had happened, seeing someone not involved in our current crisis felt like an unexpected chance to breathe. "Yes, small world," I tried to smile. "How are you?" "I'm well, thanks," Victoria gave me a once-over. "But you look tired. Is everything okay?" I meant to say, "Yes, everything's fine." But instead, to my own surprise, I felt my eyes fill with tears. "Not exactly," I admitted, turning away to hide my emotions. Unexpectedly, Victoria took my hand. "There's a nice cafe on the 3rd floor. Come, let's grab a coffee. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone neutral." In the cafe, after some hesitation, I told her about what was happening, leaving out the confidential details. "This is terrible," Victoria said, seeming genuinely outraged. "That kind of competition tactic is completely unacceptable. You know, maybe I can help." I looked up at her, surprised. "Richard, my husband," she continued. "He has contacts in a lot of companies, including some of the financial institutions working with InnovaBuild. Maybe he could find out something useful." I didn't know what to say. Help from Victoria was the last thing I had expected. "Why do you want to help?" I asked directly. She paused, as if searching for the answer herself. "Maybe because after the reunion, I realized how much I miss having something real," she finally said. "Seeing you and Jack, how you support each other, it made me think." I hesitated. My instincts told me to be cautious, but desperation, and the need to help Jack, was stronger. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Let's set up a meeting," You, me, Jack, and Richard. Something informal. Let's see what we can do. Deep down, I still felt wary, but hope outweighed it. All right, I said. Let's give it a try. The meeting with Richard was scheduled for Friday evening at his bank. Jack agreed to go only after I'd pleaded with him. I'm doing this for you, he said as we entered the grand building of First National Bank, but don't expect much from it. Richard received us in his office on the top floor, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Victoria was already there, dressed in a tailored business suit that still managed to flatter her figure. Jack, Emily, Richard stood to greet us with a handshake. Glad you accepted our invitation. The next hour was spent discussing the issue. Jack, reserved at first, gradually opened up, explaining the details of the project and the accusations against it. Richard asked sharp, professional questions, clearly grasping the situation well. I've reviewed the material Victoria shared with me, he said when Jack finished, and I must say, InnovaBuild's claim looks shaky. So, you think we can win this case? I asked, hopeful. More than that, Richard leaned back in his chair. I'd be willing to offer you temporary financing to keep the project afloat while this gets resolved. Jack's eyes widened in surprise. That's very generous, he said cautiously. But why? We hardly know each other. Richard smiled, though his eyes remained unreadable. Let's just say, I value innovation and fair competition, and I value the chance to form business ties with promising companies. It all sounded logical, and yet something in his tone made me uneasy. We'll need some time to consider your offer, I said before Jack could respond. Of course, Richard nodded. Dinner started out tense, but slowly relaxed. Victoria kept the conversation going with amusing stories from her charity work. Midway through, Richard's phone rang. Excuse me? He said, glancing at the screen. Important client from Europe. I have to take this. He left the table, leaving the three of us alone. As soon as he was out of sight, Victoria's expression changed. The polished mask slipped, revealing fatigue, and something else I couldn't quite name. He won't be back for at least 30 minutes, she said, staring into her half-full wine glass. Always the same. Important calls at the worst moments. Are you and Richard okay? I asked cautiously. Victoria looked up, and for a moment there was bitterness in her eyes. She gave a dry, almost hollow laugh. Okay is a good word for it. Everything works. Everything looks fine from the outside, and everything is completely empty on the inside. Jack shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by the sudden openness. Richard married me because I look good beside him in society columns, Victoria went on, lost in her own thoughts. I married him because he seemed stable, dependable, successful. But in 6 years of marriage, I haven't once felt the kind of connection I see between you two, even in the smallest gestures. Her eyes welled up with tears, and I realized I was seeing the real Victoria for the first time. Not the haughty girl from school or the flawless socialite, but a human being with pain and doubt. I'm sorry. Victoria wiped her eyes with a napkin. Must be the wine. Makes me sentimental. It's okay, I said, hesitantly reaching for her hand. Sometimes it helps to talk. I envy you, she said, glancing from me to Jack. What you have is real. Not status, not appearances, real love and support. That's rare in the world I live in. Jack and I exchanged a glance. Despite all our struggles, we'd always been a team. Enough about me, Victoria suddenly said, snapping back into focus. Tell me more about your project. I want to understand all the details. Maybe I can help. Still a bit rattled by her confession, Jack began explaining the most innovative features of Horizon. Victoria listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and showing a surprising grasp of architectural concepts. By the time Richard returned, there was a sense of professional rapport between her and Jack. Apologies for the delay, Richard said as he sat back down. Hope I didn't miss too much. No, Victoria replied with a smile, one that now seemed forced. Jack was just telling us about his project. It's really impressive. No doubt, Richard said flatly. Now, back to our proposal. Jack, Emily, we'll need a few documents for formal review before we can move forward. Nothing unusual, just standard banking procedure. What kind of documents? Jack asked warily. Financial reports from the past year, company structure, project details, Richard said in a businesslike tone. Victoria will forward you the full list. As the dinner wrapped up, we exchanged contact info and agreed on a follow-up meeting. Despite his initial skepticism, Jack looked encouraged. Maybe this really is a chance, he said as we drove home. Richard knows his stuff, and temporary financing will buy us time to fight InnovaBuild. The next day, we sent Victoria all the requested documents, including the full Horizon specifications. A week passed in anxious waiting. Victoria kept in touch regularly, saying things were going well and that Richard was very interested. Jack gradually returned to his energetic self, full of ideas and plans. Then everything collapsed again. On Wednesday morning, Mark Levinsky, our lawyer, burst into Jack's office, where I happened to be helping with paperwork. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without even saying hello. His face was pale with rage. "What news?" Jack looked up from his computer. InnovaBuild just held a press conference. Mark switched on the wall-mounted TV and flipped to the business channel. They unveiled a new project. Guess what it's called? New Horizon? The screen showed Victor Craig, InnovaBuild's CEO, standing proudly beside a massive model of a building that looked disturbingly identical to Jack's design. New Horizon will be the city's first truly green office complex, Craig declared into the camera. Jack froze, staring at the screen in horror and disbelief. This is my project," he whispered, down to the wording. "They beat us to it," Mark said grimly. "Even if we prove the idea was yours, the public will think we're copying them now." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just aggressive competition, it was outright theft of intellectual property. "But how?" I whispered. "How did they get access to that level of detail?" Then it hit me. The documents we had sent to Victoria and Richard, all the project details, all the innovative solutions. We had handed them over willingly to someone who, as it turned out, had ties to our competitors. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was my mistake. I had brought Victoria into our lives. I had trusted her. "Jack," I began, my voice trembling, "I think I know how the leak happened." He turned to me, and the look on his face stopped me cold. He already knew. "The bank," he said evenly. "Richard Hughes, First National Bank, which I just remembered is one of InnovaBuild's primary lenders." Mark let out a low whistle. "What bank? What, Richard? What are you talking about?" "Richard Hughes, Victoria Miles's husband, my former classmate," I said, my voice sounding distant. "He offered us financing. We gave him all the documents for the project." Mark slammed his fist on the table. "God damn it! You gave confidential information to a third party without a legal review or NDA?" "It was my idea," I said, nausea rising in my throat. Jack had doubts. I insisted. Jack didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the TV screen, where Craig continued to praise the innovative project they had stolen from us. "Check it," Jack finally said to Mark. "Find the link between First National and InnovaBuild. We need proof." Mark nodded and left the office, leaving us alone. The silence that filled the room was deafening. I waited for an outburst, yelling, accusations, anything but this frozen stillness. "Jack," I finally said, "I'm so sorry. I thought they genuinely wanted to help." "You know what's worse?" He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something far more painful than anger, disappointment. "I warned you. I told you not to trust them, but you were so wrapped up in this fantasy of redemption, of making peace with the past and with Victoria, you didn't listen." "That's not fair," I said. "I was trying to help, to save the project." "Save?" Jack gave a bitter laugh. "You destroyed it. 10 years of work. everything we built. And for what? To feel better about the school queen? His words cut deeper than any scream because there was truth in them. A part of me had wanted validation from Victoria to prove I was worth something in her eyes. "I'll call her," I said, grabbing my phone. "I'll find out what's going on." "Don't bother," Jack waved a hand. "She won't answer, or she'll deny everything. They got what they wanted." That night we came home later than usual. Lily, sensing the tension between us, quietly took her plate and retreated to her room, leaving her dinner unfinished. "What's going on?" she asked before closing her door. "Did you fight?" "No, sweetheart," I lied. "Just grown-up work stuff." But when the door shut, the storm broke loose. All the pent-up emotions of the day exploded. "How could you?" Jack whispered, his voice low so Lily wouldn't hear, but there was more rage in his whisper than in any shout. "She's an actress, Emily." He slammed his fist on the table, making a plate jump. "She's been playing roles her whole life, and you fell for it." His words, his disappointment, cut me deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. But the worst part was knowing he was right. I had made a terrible mistake trusting Victoria. "I'll fix this," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I swear I'll find a way." Jack shook his head. "Some things can't be fixed, Emily," he said quietly. And that scared me more than his anger. The days that followed were a nightmare. Jack barely spoke to me. He left early, came home late. We spoke only when necessary, just enough to maintain the illusion of normalcy for Lily. Things weren't better at work. The investors officially withdrew funding, citing compromised project originality. Alex Gordon, whom I had suspected, was cleared. The internal audit confirmed that the files he copied were legitimate backups and never left the company network. The real leak had been much closer. Me, the one who had trusted Victoria. Jack began selling personal assets to keep the company afloat. Our vacation was canceled. I tried calling Victoria nearly every day, but her phone remained off. Emails bounced back. Her social media accounts had suddenly gone private. Our marriage was unraveling. Jack started sleeping in the guest room, saying he didn't want to wake me when he got in late, but I knew the real reason. He couldn't look me in the eye. One night, I overheard him on the phone. "We could lose the company, Paul," he said quietly. "InnovaBuild already secured the investors we were negotiating with. They're using our own innovations, just slightly modified." For the first time in years, I felt truly powerless. I, who had always prided myself on my analytical mind, on finding solutions, saw no way out. That evening, in a moment of desperation, I decided to call Daniel, my old school friend who was now a neurosurgeon. After the reunion, we'd exchanged numbers and chatted a few times about the charity work he was involved in. To my surprise, he picked up immediately. "Emily, it's good to hear from you. How are you?" Something in his voice, genuine concern, warmth, broke the last of my emotional defenses. I told him everything about Jack's project, about Victoria and Richard, the betrayal, and how our family was falling apart. "God, Emily, that's awful," Daniel said when I finished. "I'm so sorry." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, wiping away tears. Everything I tried to do to help only made things worse. "Listen," he said after a pause. "Maybe I can help. One of my patients is Alan Stern, a top-tier attorney specializing in IP and corporate litigation. I can set up a meeting." "I don't know." I hesitated. "Jack doesn't want me involved, and after what happened with Victoria—" "Emily," Daniel said firmly, "you made a mistake by trusting the wrong people. That doesn't mean you should stop trying to make things right. Alan is the real deal. I vouch for him." I hesitated. Trust had become a dangerous territory for me. "Just meet with him," Daniel urged. "No commitments. If you don't like what you hear, walk away. But Emily, you can't give up now. Not when your family is on the line." His words hit home. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll meet him." "Tomorrow, my office, 5 o'clock, Daniel said quickly, as if afraid I'd change my mind. "And Emily? It'll be okay, I promise." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe there was still a chance to make things right. But after Victoria's betrayal, trust came at a cost. By 4:30 the next day, I was already en route to Daniel's office, located at a private clinic downtown. As I pulled up to the building, I spotted a familiar figure on the front steps. A tall woman in a dark coat, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Victoria. My heart skipped a beat. I almost turned the car around, but curiosity and anger won over fear. I parked and walked toward the entrance with determined steps. "Emily!" Victoria stepped toward me, but stopped when she saw the look on my face. "Thank God you came." "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. "Come to admire the wreckage you caused?" She paled. "I understand your anger, and I deserve it, but please, give me 5 minutes, just 5, and you'll understand." "I have a meeting," I snapped, brushing past her. "With Alan Stern." "I know," Victoria said quickly. "Daniel told me. I asked him to arrange it." I stopped in my tracks. "What? Can we talk in your car?" Victoria glanced around nervously. "Not here, out in the open." I hesitated, but the situation was becoming stranger by the minute. Finally, I nodded and led her to my car. As soon as we got in, Victoria pulled a thick folder from her bag. "First of all, I have to admit, yes, I did give Jack's documents to InnovaBuild," she began, and I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. "But not for the reason you think." "Then for what?" I barely restrained myself from shouting. Victoria took a deep breath. "Richard, he's not just connected to InnovaBuild. He's one of their silent investors through a shell company. They've been working together for years. It's a kind of scheme. Richard's bank provides funding to companies, which then become targets of hostile takeovers by InnovaBuild." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "And you're part of this?" "No, I mean, not knowingly," she looked away. "I always knew Richard had shady business dealings, but the scale, I only realized it when I saw how he handled your project documents." "And you decided to use our connection for it?" The bitterness in my voice was overwhelming. "No," Victoria shook her head. "At first, yes, I agreed to help Richard connect with you. He got interested in Jack's company after the reunion." She paused. "But when I saw you two together, heard the story of your company, something changed. I couldn't be part of destroying what you built." "But you gave them the documents," I reminded her. "Yes," she admitted, "but not in the way Richard planned. I altered key components, crucial details, enough to make their version of the project fatally flawed." I stared at her, stunned. "You... what?" "They stole a broken design, Emily." Victoria opened the folder and began showing me documents. "Look, the water system they copied? Physically impossible." I flipped through the documents, and understanding slowly dawned. Victoria hadn't just tweaked details, she had sabotaged the stolen version, embedding traps that would trigger once InnovaBuild tried to implement it. "But they already brought in investors," I said. "They announced the project publicly." "Exactly," Victoria smiled for the first time during our conversation, and there was something predatory in that smile. "And when it's revealed that the project is unbuildable, that it violates a dozen regulations, it'll be the end of InnovaBuild, and of Richard." "You're betraying your own husband?" I still couldn't grasp the scale of what was happening. Victoria's expression grew somber. "You don't know what he's really like," she said quietly. "These past years, it wasn't a marriage. It was a prison. Control over everything, every step, every decision, even my charity work. He used it for his own purposes." She paused. "I'm not proud of what I did. I should have told you the truth from the start. But I was scared. Scared of Richard. Scared of losing everything." She pulled another folder from her bag. "This contains proof that InnovaBuild used stolen materials. Digital traces, file modification dates, everything. And this?" She handed me a flash drive. "Recordings of Richard's conversations with Craig, where they openly discuss stealing your project." You recorded your husband? I stared at the flash drive like it was a bomb. For the past 2 years, Victoria confessed. At first for my own protection, later as insurance. And this, she said, pulling out one last folder, contains documents proving Richard's tax evasion, falsified bank reports, and involvement in money laundering. I stared at the pile of evidence she brought, barely able to comprehend the scope of her actions. Jack needs to see this, I said, gathering the files. Alan Stern will help you use it properly. She glanced at her watch. He's waiting at Daniel's office. Go, don't let me keep you. I hesitated, looking at the woman I had once seen as my lifelong antagonist. Now she looked entirely different, vulnerable, determined, and truly brave. Come with me, I decided. You should explain this in person. But when we arrived at Daniel's office and I called Jack to join us, the moment I'd feared came true. He arrived half an hour later, and his expression hardened as soon as he saw Victoria. What is she doing here? He asked coldly, without so much as a greeting. I stepped toward him. Jack, please just listen. No. He cut me off. I'm not listening to another lie. He turned to leave. Mr. Parker, Alan Stern interjected, an older man with an aura of calm authority. I understand your feelings, but I suggest you review these documents before making a decision. Jack stopped in the doorway, his whole body taut with inner conflict. I'll wait outside, Victoria said quietly, heading for the door. It'll be easier that way. Once she was gone, Jack slowly approached the table covered in files. What is all this? He asked, not touching the papers. Your chance to take back your project, Stern said simply. For the next hour, Daniel, Alan, and I walked Jack through the evidence Victoria had gathered. With each passing minute, his expression changed, from disbelief to cautious hope, and finally to realization. This is impressive, he admitted at last. But why? Why would she risk everything to help us? Maybe you should ask her yourself, Daniel suggested. When Victoria returned to the room, Jack looked at her differently now, with guarded respect, though still wary. Why? He asked simply. Victoria sank into the chair across from him, looking utterly exhausted. Because enough is enough, she said. When I saw you and Emily, the connection you have, I realized what I've denied myself all these years, chasing status and approval. You could have just refused to participate, Jack pointed out. And what would that have changed? She asked bitterly. Richard would have found another way. He always does. She straightened. I'm ready to testify against Richard and InnovaBuild in court. The room fell silent. Jack studied Victoria for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. You realize Richard won't forgive you for this, Jack said quietly. He'll do everything he can to destroy you. I know, Victoria nodded. But I'd rather live in truth than in golden lies. You and Emily taught me that, even if you didn't mean to. We can't act immediately, Alan Stern cut in. We need a strategy, a plan that uses this evidence to maximum effect. Jack slowly nodded, then looked back at Victoria. If we do this, we do it together, as a team. No secrets, no solo moves. Understand? I understand, she said seriously, and I accept. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of planning. Daniel's apartment became our makeshift war room. The bedroom walls were covered in diagrams and timelines, the table stacked with documents Victoria had been collecting for years. Alan Stern led the legal charge. His calm, methodical demeanor instilled confidence in all of us. Direct legal confrontation is not our best play, he explained, pacing the room. InnovaBuild has more resources. They can drag the process out for years. We need a swift, decisive strike. I can use my position, Victoria said. Richard still thinks I'm away in California, resting at my sister's. He doesn't suspect I know anything. He believes I just followed his orders. That's risky, Jack said, and I could hear genuine concern in his voice. If he gets suspicious. I lived with him for 6 years, Victoria replied quietly. Trust me, I know how to play my part. The plan we devised was bold and dangerous. Victoria would return to Richard, pretending to be apologetic for her sudden disappearance, and begin gathering more damning evidence from the inside. Meanwhile, Alan would prepare the legal grounds for the lawsuit, and Jack would discreetly meet with investors, showing them proof that New Horizon was not only unbuildable, but based on stolen material. Late in the evening, after Daniel and Alan had left, Jack, Victoria, and I remained in the apartment, finalizing the last details of the plan. "Tomorrow it all begins," Victoria said, closing her laptop. "I need to be back before Richard wakes up." "Are you sure you can handle it?" Jack asked. "If you feel unsafe at any point, get out. No project is worth your safety." I looked at my husband in surprise. Just 2 days ago, he hadn't even wanted to be in the same room with Victoria. Now he was genuinely concerned for her well-being. "I'll be careful," Victoria promised, "but I have to do this. Not just for you, for myself." When she left, Jack and I were finally alone in the silence of the rented apartment. For the first time in weeks, it was just the two of us. No observers, no allies. "It's strange how everything turned out," Jack said quietly, gazing out at the city lights. "Just a week ago, I was ready to lose everything. And now we have a chance," I said gently, approaching him, unsure if he was ready for reconciliation. Jack turned to me, and in his eyes I saw exhaustion, hope, and what looked like remorse. "Emily, I need to apologize," he said unexpectedly, "for how I've behaved these past weeks, for pushing you away when we were both hurting." "I understand why you were angry," I replied. "Because of me, the company was at risk." "No," Jack shook his head. "You were trying to help. Yes, you trusted the wrong people, but your intentions were pure. And I just shut down when things got hard. That's not what I promised you when we got married." I stepped into his arms, and he embraced me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt his warmth, his strength, and tears of relief streamed down my cheeks. "We'll get through this," he whispered into my hair. "Together, like always." The next 2 weeks felt like a carefully orchestrated play. Victoria returned to Richard, explaining her absence as a need to clear her head after the unpleasant incident with our company. Richard seemed to accept it, too distracted by the triumphant rollout of the New Horizon project. Meanwhile, Jack met with investors one by one, quietly showing them documents proving that the project they had backed was not only technically unfeasible, but also based on stolen intellectual property. Alan Stern prepared the legal grounds for lawsuits against InnovaBuild and against Richard Hughes personally. Each night, Victoria found a way to contact us, passing along new evidence and intel. "Richard and Craig are meeting tomorrow at the InnovaBuild office," she reported one evening. "This is our chance. I can be there. Richard always brings me when he wants to impress partners." "It's too risky," Jack immediately objected. "If they get suspicious—" "I have a plan," Victoria said confidently, "and a recording device that's undetectable. Trust me." The next day, we were all on edge. Victoria didn't check in until late at night, and we were seriously worried. Finally, just before midnight, there was a knock at the door. Victoria looked exhausted, but her eyes burned with triumph. "I've got everything," she said, pulling a tiny recorder from her bag. A full confession. They spoke freely, never imagining I could be against them. We gathered around the laptop and listened. Richard's and Craig's voices came through clearly, discussing how they outplayed naive Parker, how they used stolen designs, how they planned to crush the competition. "We'll have to rework the system, obviously," Craig was saying. "Their version doesn't function properly." "Doesn't matter," Richard replied. "What matters is we already have the investors. By the time they realize we need more funds for adjustments, it'll be too late to pull out." Classic move. Jack's face grew darker as the recording went on, but there was no despair in his eyes, only a cold resolve. "We can work with this," Alan Stern said when the playback ended. "Immediately." The next day unfolded at breakneck speed. That morning, Alan filed a formal lawsuit against InnovaBuild and Richard Hughes. Simultaneously, the recording and incriminating documents were sent to New Horizons' primary investors and the board of Richard's bank. By noon, the scandal exploded. Several investors publicly withdrew their support from InnovaBuild. The bank's board convened an emergency meeting, and by 3 p.m., Richard Hughes found his accounts frozen, his office access revoked, and journalists on his doorstep asking questions about fraud and corporate espionage. Victoria was home when Richard stormed in, furious. "What the hell is going on?" he yelled, waving his phone. "They suspended me. Temporarily, they say. Pending investigation. Investigation into what, damn it?" Victoria rose slowly from the sofa, where she had been casually flipping through a magazine. "I believe they mean the investigation into your years of fraud, darling," she said calmly. Richard froze, staring at her in disbelief. "You—" His eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" "What I should have done long ago." Victoria set down the magazine. "Put an end to your games." "You?" He laughed, though his voice shook with panic. "You're nothing without me. What could you possibly—" "I can stand my ground," she said firmly. "I know right from wrong, and I can start over." His face twisted with rage, and he took a step toward her, just as the door opened. There stood Jack, me, and 2 police officers holding an arrest warrant. "Richard Hughes," one officer said, "you're under arrest for corporate espionage, fraud, and tax evasion." As they led Richard away, he cast one last look at Victoria, a mix of hatred and disbelief. She stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching, and I saw her shoulders rise higher with every second, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. The next day, Victor Craig, InnovaBuild's CEO, requested a meeting with Jack. Pale and drawn, he looked like a man watching his empire collapse. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly as we sat down. "Justice," Jack replied simply. "Justice is a flexible word," Craig said with a nervous chuckle. "Let's talk specifics. What will it take to settle this?" Jack laid out our terms: a public withdrawal of the New Horizon project, official recognition of Parker Construction's intellectual property, full compensation for damages, and a public apology. "That'll bankrupt the company," Craig blanched. "Maybe," Jack nodded, "but it's still better than what'll happen if this goes to court. We have everything, Mr. Craig, all the proof." Craig caved. That same day, a press conference was held where, with a face like he was swallowing acid, he admitted New Horizon had been based on intellectual property belonging to Parker Construction, and that the company was withdrawing from the project and issuing a formal apology for the misunderstanding. By that evening, Jack received calls from 3 investors who had previously walked away. Now they were eager to meet. Horizon was saved. 6 months later, we stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Horizon Tower, the first stone laid for what would become the city's newest skyscraper. The construction site was packed. Parker Construction staff, investors, media, and, to our surprise, many of our former classmates. After all the press coverage of the InnovaBuild scandal, the story of Jack and our company had become well known, even among the graduates of Westwood High. Jack stepped onto the small stage to speak. Dressed in a tailored suit, silver just beginning to show at his temples, he looked stronger and more confident than ever. "Horizon is not just a building," he began, and the crowd fell silent. "It's a symbol that honesty, perseverance, and staying true to your principles do win in the end. This project was nearly lost to betrayal and corruption. But thanks to a few exceptional people, not only did we save it, we made it better." Jack swept his gaze over the crowd and continued, "I want to thank the Parker Construction team for their unwavering dedication during the darkest times. I want to thank our investors for believing in us. And," he paused, "I especially want to thank 2 people without whom we wouldn't be standing here today." He looked at me, and his eyes filled with warmth. "My wife, Emily, who never stopped believing in me and in our company, who fought for us when I was ready to give up." I felt myself blushing under the sudden attention of the entire crowd. Then Jack turned to Victoria, who stood a little apart. "And Victoria Miles," he said, and a ripple of surprise ran through the audience. whose courage and determination to right past wrongs saved not only our project, but possibly our entire company. Victoria, wearing a modest blue dress and sporting a new, short haircut, a look that matched her new life, looked visibly moved by the public recognition. After the scandal and Richard's arrest, she had filed for divorce and started over from scratch. With our support, she opened a small interior design studio that had already secured several contracts, including the design of the public spaces in Horizon. After the official ceremony, as guests wandered among the tents with drinks and appetizers, Victoria approached us. "Thank you for the kind words, Jack," she said, "though I'm not sure I deserve them." "You absolutely do," Jack replied firmly. "How's your project with the Children's Center coming along?" Her face lit up. Her new studio was working on a center for underprivileged children, a project she had launched from the ground up, investing part of her divorce settlement. "It's coming together. The opening's in 2 months. You both have to come." We wouldn't miss it, I promised. We chatted a while longer, and I noticed how naturally and easily Jack and Victoria now spoke, as professionals who respected each other's talents, as allies who had faced challenges together. A year later, I sat in my office at Parker Construction's headquarters. Yes, I now officially worked at my husband's company, heading the finance department, drafting an email to the organizers of the next class reunion. "Dear friends, I'm delighted to announce that Parker Construction Group is happy to offer the New Horizon Community Center as the venue for our upcoming high school reunion. With its modern space and panoramic city views, it's the perfect setting for our 20th anniversary celebration." I paused, reflecting on how much had truly changed in our relationships with former classmates. But the most surprising transformation had been in my relationship with Victoria. Now, we regularly had lunch together, discussing projects, sharing news, and simply enjoying each other's company. Her charitable foundation, now completely independent of her former husband's influence, was thriving, funding educational programs for children from low-income families. I continued writing, "The past few years have taught me that true success isn't measured by material wealth or social status, but by the ability to stay true to yourself, admit your mistakes, and find the courage to change. Sometimes, the most unexpected turns lead us exactly where we're meant to be, and the people we once saw as adversaries become our most important allies." The office door opened, and Jack entered with Lily, just back from her swimming lesson. "Mom, I swam the whole length without stopping," Lily announced proudly, running to hug me. "That's amazing, sweetheart." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of chlorine and children's shampoo. "What are you working on?" Jack asked, peering over my shoulder at the screen. "Writing the invitation for the reunion," I replied. "At Horizon, just like we planned." Jack smiled, and in his eyes I saw the same warmth that had carried us through all the trials and triumphs of the years. "By the way, don't forget," he said, "we're going to the opening of the new wing at Victoria's Children's Center tonight. She's really nervous." "Of course," I nodded. "I'm getting ready." When they left, I turned back to my email and typed the final lines. These 15 years since high school have taught me many things, but the most important lesson came only recently. A person's true worth isn't defined by their status or wealth, but by their character, by their ability to own their mistakes and find the strength to change. Sometimes, those who hurt us are acting from their own pain, and the greatest victory isn't revenge, but helping them find a better path. I look forward to our next reunion and to the discoveries it may bring. With warm regards, Emily Parker. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and comment.